Hello and welcome back to another World of Warcraft lore video. This time we are going to be talking about the Prophet Velen, and the reason I'm doing this video is because, well, first of all, he is a very interesting character, but also he's going to be one of the main alliance guys in Warlords of Draenor, because when we go back to old Draenor, we're going to find old Velen, or at least an alternate universe version of him. Now in terms of his in-game story, well, he hasn't really had a lot, but the guy does have some great lore. I think in one of the common themes of World of Warcraft, there's often great lore, and then a rather more poorly executed in-game story. But anyway, let's jump into the lore for this character. So Velen is old, very old. His story begins on Argus, which is a very distant planet, about 25,000 years ago. He was one of the leaders of the Eredar, and they were magically proficient and very advanced people. And I suppose they still are, however, and well, you'll find out what happened to them. He ruled along with Archimonde and Kil Jaeden, and it's heavily implied that they were very strong friends, basically brothers, and especially Kil Jaeden. Velen actually sort of viewed him as nearly a reflection of himself. There was a very strong bond between the three of them, essentially. And each were very powerful in their own way. Archimonde was, of course, a very strong mage, but he was also very, in terms of, like, his power that could be used for destructive forces, he was very powerful. He didn't use it that way, though, but when he did join the Burning Legion, Archimonde would prove to be the main kind of warlord guy. And then there's Kil Jaeden, who was extremely cunning and smart. Of course, he was just more intelligent and a proficient mage at this stage than cunning. This, of course, would also change in time. And Velen's gift was the gift of foresight, and this was given to him by a Naru called Kuur, and the Naru are essentially just physical embodiments of the light. It's hard to know exactly what they are, but yeah, it's probably going to be a video sometime. Anyway, things started to go a little bit south after Sagaras turned up. He noticed that the magical power of the Eredar people was just magnificent, it was very powerful. And also that their civilization had really accomplished a lot in terms of what they were like. Their planet was essentially a utopia, and he decided that instead of destroying them, he would, well, I suppose the realistic word to say is enslave the race. He appeared before their leaders, and he was masquerading as a benevolent entity, and he offered them the, basically the power to transform. And this would gain them all more power, and it was originally for the purpose of unifying the galaxy, unifying all the worlds, under a utopia of peace, etc. Now, Archimonde and Kil Jaeden, along with 2/3 of the Eredar people, decided to agree to this. Velen, however, had the gift of foresight that I talked about earlier, and he saw the true nature of Sagaras' plan. He prayed to Kuur, who was the Naru, of course, who granted him his power, and Kuur told him to gather his followers at the highest mountain of the on the planet at the longest day of the year. And they did. They barely escaped the Burning Legion, and at that mountain they found a Naru ship, which would be called, well, in terms of in-game, would be called Oshugun. Kil Jaeden, who used to be essentially Velen's best friend, vowed to destroy them utterly for defying what they had done. Basically, Kil Jaeden and Archimonde were power-crazed, very evil, and they had been transformed into the Man'ari, who were kind of the very tall, larger, twisted Eredar. Velen and his followers renamed themselves the Draenei, which means exiled ones in their own tongue, and they used this ship that was at the mountain to flee from the Legion, and they spent many hundreds of years, from what I can gather, moving from world to world, constantly settling and then being caught, and then settling and being caught again, until they finally made their way to Draenor, and their ship crashed, and they met the locals, who were the orcs, and the Draenei and orcs, they were in contact, and it was more of a business kind of trade sort of thing than an alliance. Now the orcs ended up finding Oshugun, and a lot of the Naru power essentially meant that they could see embodiments of their ancestors and things like that, and it was named Oshugun by the orcs and treated as a holy relic. It was, of course, just the Naru ship, but, well, take it for what you will. They established Shattrath City as their capital, and then Velen's private residence was the Temple of Karabor. The Temple of Karabor would later be known as the Black Temple. It's where the Shadow Council was mainly set up, and where Illidan would eventually rule from. Terracor Forest, or what was called Talador at that time, seemed to be the heart of their civilization. There was another city that they've named called Telmor, and I'm pretty sure that we'll actually get to see that in Warlords of Draenor. Overall, they had quite a big thing going. Now, one notable event before things turned really bad with the Legion is when Druidan and Ogrim talked with Velen after the Draenei had rescued them from ogres. And Velen told basically the prophecy of the Doomhammer. It was the weapon that would fall from Ogrim's father, pass to him, and then would pass from Ogrim to Thrall. And the Thrall, being, I think, a non-Doomhammer or Blackhand, whatever his clan was, a non-orc of that clan would eventually lead the orcs to salvation. So this was one of the sort of first in-game prophecies that we hear from Velen. Now, quite a few peaceful years passed, actually, and Kil Jaeden finally worked out where the Draenei were settled. This would, of course, start to end the peace. He contacted Ner'zhul, who was a very powerful orc shaman, and he basically masqueraded as the spirit of Ner'zhul's dead mate, and he tricked him into thinking that essentially the Draenei were trying to plot against them. And Ner'zhul initially wasn't too sure, but he then caved and decided, yeah, we really need to start taking them out. And while the Horde didn't have, well, not the Horde, they weren't the Horde at this point, the Orcs, they didn't really have a solidified leadership at all. They were just a bunch of clans, but Ner'zhul's strong connection to the ancestors meant that he was very well respected. And through this, Ner'zhul basically convinced all the clans to start attacking the Draenei, and attack them they did. Now, there was a time when Velen was trying to negotiate with the Draenei, not with the Draenei, with the Orcs, and really this was more the sort of thing that the Orcs decided to do this, but their real plan was just to assassinate him, and one of the couriers was killed, so eventually Druidan would go, and they met at Oshu'gun. And while there, Velen explained to them all what the ship actually was, and this really was to the anger of the Orcs, because it was a sacred place. This was kind of blasphemy what they were saying. But despite all this, Druidan thought that there was no real honour in killing a foe that was captured in such a way, and Druidan was quite an honourable orc, so he let them go. And over time, the attacks would start to step up, and the city of Telmore was actually destroyed in an attack led by Druidan himself. While Druidan was at the city, he noticed a few different things from when he was a kid, when he visited there with Ogrim, and he ended up taking down its magical defences and just basically slaughtering everyone in the city. It seems more like Druidan was doing this sort of thing out of orders rather than because he was very bloodthirsty. That certainly goes with his character anyway. And after this, the Temple of Karabor was basically destroyed and defiled by Gul'dan's warlocks and was turned into the headquarters of the Shadow Council. This would later be the residence of Manaroth and then of Illidan, and it's what we would know as Black Temple. So after this, the Draenei decided they needed to go back into hiding, and they went into Zangarmarsh and they stayed there for a very long time. They were essentially, well, they basically given Kil Jaeden the slip, and it worked out quite well. And during this time, they started to realise that some of the Draenei were kind of, in terms of the revolution, regressing. And the main sort of leader of these guys was called Nobundu, Nobundu. And he would eventually visit with Velen, and they had taken up shamanism because their connection with the light had been severed. Despite their relation to the Draenei, most of the Draenei did shun them, except for Velen. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of an awkward situation there between them all. Now, many years later, the Dark Portal to Azeroth would open once again. This is after the First War and the Second War and all that stuff. And it was with Illidan and Kil'thas coming through. Kil settled in Tempest Keep, which is a narrow interdimensional fortress, which basically means it's a big spaceship. And noticing that things were rapidly getting worse in the area, Velen decided to personally lead a raid against the Blood Elves to capture the Exodar, which was one of the surrounding satellites of Tempest Keep. Unfortunately for them, the Blood Elves sabotaged the engine, causing a reactor core malfunction, which resulted in them crashing on Azeroth. Nearly sounds like a bit of a Star Trek plotline there, doesn't it? So, yeah, while there was quite the crash, and quite a few of the Draenei did die in the crash, as we know from the starting zone in Azure Mistile. Yeah, basically, after this, they kind of crash, they stabilize, and not a whole lot happens with Velen. He is around during the Burning Crusade, but personally he doesn't do a lot until the defeat of Kil Jaeden, where he comes to congratulate the players and use a Spark of Meru, who is one of the, he was basically a fallen Naru, but he used the Spark of this Naru to recharge the Sunwell, which would save the Blood Elves from their magical withdrawal problem. This was quite the good gesture because the Blood Elves had, initially started being, they were attacking the Draenei. But really, after this, the Draenei fall out of lore nearly completely. They really just don't do that much. Now, Velen does later appear in the novel Wolfheart. There is a meeting of Alliance leaders at Darnassus, to which he had not been invited. basically, and this is, I nearly think this is a nod to the in-game stuff, the leaders had all assumed that the Draenei were now neutral because basically they hadn't did anything as I suppose a unified people since after Kil Jaeden's defeat. Which I think is funny. Okay, we do see the odd Draenei NPC, but as a whole we don't really see too much of their race. Now, Velen dismissed their assertions and said that he was committed to the Alliance and would stay for as long as they are needed. He ended up at this meeting taking an interest in Anduin, and they basically spent a lot of time talking about the light and that sort of thing. Anduin had a few arguments with his dad, and he decided to leave for a bit and train with Velen in being a priest. And after a bit of a talk with Velen, with Anduin, Velen started to wonder why the light had not guided him towards the events of the Cataclysm, and ultimately he still thinks the Burning Legion are by far the greatest threat, but he kind of realised that he spent so long thinking about the future and the Legion that he had basically lost focus on what was going on in the present. And there was later an incident where there was a human riot outside the Exodar, and a lot of people seem to have got hurt, maybe not killed, but certainly hurt. And him and Anduin basically went and quelled the problem and stopped all of the fighting that had been going on. And at that point, Velen saw the vision of Anduin leading an army of Alliance, Horde, Naru, and Dragons. This is the Army of the Light prophecy, thing that you've probably heard lots of lore YouTubers talking about, like I think Noble especially. And this basically says that Anduin is going to be the guy who leads a giant army of essentially everyone who is not the Burning Legion against the Burning Legion, which is quite cool. So yeah, really in terms of in-game things, he just hasn't done that much, but he's definitely going to play quite a role in Warlords. We see a different Velen. On the trailer, he is shown leading the defense of Karabor, and it suggests that he's far more combative than the original version of Velen that we saw in our own timeline. And I'll just round off the video by reading the Warlords of Draenor blurb for the character. As the ancient leader of the Draenei, the Prophet Velen has spent hundreds of human lifetimes carefully weighing and recording the futures he foresees so that creation itself does not fall. Velen's guidance persevered and preserved his people through an exodus from their homeworld, Argus, but his wisdom is in question after the arrival of the Iron Horde on Draenor. What value is a prophet whose visions cannot prevent calamity? And I suppose this might be referencing the fact that this alternate reality Velen probably couldn't really have used his foresight to find us going into their homeworld. A little bit strange, right? But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff.